Welcome to our parent talk. It's not all in your head. With us tonight, we have Family and Children's Services, Carrie Gibson and Emily Farmer with COPES. We have Daybreak Family Services with Karen Lacey. And the Parent-Child Center of Tulsa, we have Steve Hahn. They're our panel, and they each have subject matters that they're going to be talking to you about. And again, at the end, not at the end of their specific section, but at the very end, you'll be able to ask whatever questions you may have, okay? We'll start things off with Daybreak and Karen Lacey. Karen Lacey is an educator and licensed professional counselor with 7 years experience in the mental health care field. She serves as a Daybreak therapist for the Broken Arrow Freshman Academy. Professional experience includes inpatient and outpatient settings with children, adolescents, adults, and families. She is trained in TFCBT, that's trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, and CPS, collaborative problem solving, and specialized training in suicide prevention and intervention. Ms. Karen Lacey.
Hi guys, can you hear me okay? You probably don't even need the mic because I'm super loud, but I'm glad it's here. So I've been asked to talk about two different topics, destructive behavior and substance abuse. And I'm going to kind of roll those two things in together, but also talk about them separately as well. So the first thing, I want to just give you a little bit of additional history about my background. Before Daybreak, I worked in therapeutic foster care. So I worked with children who had some very challenging behaviors. Most of those children had extreme histories of abuse and neglect, which is why they were in therapeutic foster care as opposed to bridge foster care. Well, they call it something different now. I've also worked with a nonprofit organization called Youth Villages, and I did intensive in-home family therapy. Intensive is in the home 3 times a week, basically making yourself part of this family, because these were all referrals from the Department of Human Services, children who were in danger of being removed from the home or who had been removed from the home and now were being reunited with biological parents to see if we could make this work. So lots of experience in dealing with those behaviors. First, I would just want to talk a little bit about language. I am choosing to relabel this challenging behaviors rather than destructive behaviors, and that's really simply because I approach treatment from a very strengths-based point of view. Although some of the things that kids are doing that are challenging are destructive, I just want us to kind of reframe that a little bit and think about those behaviors as challenging, because to me the word challenging means, okay, well, we're going to do something to meet that challenge, and destructive to me just has a much more negative connotation, so I wanted to change that language a little bit. When I work with kids with challenging behaviors, and some of you may be asking, okay, what is a challenging behavior? Challenging behavior is a wide range of behaviors. That could include experimenting with drugs or alcohol, or using drugs or alcohol, defiance, anger control problems. It's a wide range of things. I'm sure you would have lots of things you could add to your list from your experience. I really approach working with those challenging behaviors from the point of view of my training, which is called collaborative problem solving. Collaborative problem solving is an evidence-based practice, and basically what that means is that they've done research and shown that it is effective. And it has been used primarily with lots of children who have been victims of trauma and abuse, who have those extremely challenging behaviors. But I think it is a type of evidence-based practice that can be used with a wide range of behaviors. So it does not necessarily just for kids that have those extreme behaviors. So when you're thinking about challenging or if you want to call it destructive behaviors, there are a couple of things to consider. I always want to address with parents this idea of looking at, number one, where is your child developmentally? I work primarily with teenagers, and if you're parents of teenagers, you know that teenagers, especially the age that I work with, 13, 14, 15, that's a very transitional phase of their life where they're looking for more independence than they really are actually ready for, but they want it, and that's developmentally appropriate. I know when I was that age, I argued with my mom probably pretty much every single day, and that's developmentally appropriate for them. CPS approaches challenging behavior from the point of view that it's not a lack of will or a lack of motivation to meet an adult's expectation. It is a lack of a skill, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So challenging behaviors happen when a child or adolescent is asked to meet a parent's expectation or an adult's expectation, and they don't have the skill to meet that expectation. So let me just give you an example of that. Homework, right? I'm sure probably every parent at some point has fought with their child about doing their homework, right? Yep, right? So I have worked with kids, and sometimes, academic struggles are part of the things that we address in their therapy. And so sometimes, or I'm going to say most of the time, it's not just a kid says, I don't want to do it, that there's no motivation. There's something in the way. There's something that's getting them in the way of them being able to do and be productive in the way that we want them to be. So a part of that is identifying what's that barrier. So in a nutshell, the philosophy of CPS is kids do well if they can. So like I said, challenging behaviors arise when a child cannot meet an adult's expectation because the child doesn't have the skills to meet that expectation. So it's lack of skill, not will or motivation. Some of the skills that we're talking about, just so I can be a little more specific with you, are problem-solving skills, cognitive flexibility and frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, language processing, social skills. So let me just give you like a fun example of that. So I'm going to pick on somebody in the audience. I'm going to pick on you, okay? Is that fine? All right, good. So let's say I come to you, and I'm going to make an assumption here. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If I come to you and I say, hey, I am starting this new company, and I need this software, somebody to write this software for my website, and I'm going to give you $10,000 if you can do it in 5 days. Do you have any experience writing software or coding? Okay, all right. But I'm going to give you $10,000. So that's a big motivator, right? Because that's a nice little chunk of cash, right? So let's say I say, I'll give you $10,000 in 5 days if you can do this, right? So we get to day 2, and I come to you and I say, have you got my software written, or how are things going? And you say to me, well, I've been trying to make progress on it, but I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm really struggling here. Okay, well, maybe you just need a little more motivation. If you can finish it by the 4th day, I'm going to give you $25,000. So then 4 days later, I come back and I check in, and guess what? You still haven't made progress. You still haven't done what I needed you to do. And so I say to you, okay, I'm going to make this really good. If you can get this finished by tomorrow, I'm going to give you $50,000, right? The point of this is it doesn't really matter how much money I give you to motivate you if you do not have the basic skills to do this computer software creation and coding. It doesn't matter how much motivation or money that I give you, you're just not going to be able to do it, right? So sometimes kids just can't meet the expectations that you have for them because there's a skill missing. So basically what collaborative problem solving does is set up a way. Do you want to go ahead and hand these out? it's a guide for helping you identify what skills are lacking and how you can work on those skills. So the handout that I'm giving you is basically collaborative problem solving in a nutshell, and we're going to kind of walk through it a little bit. On the back of the handout, I've provided you with 3 books, and then the Think Kids website, which provides you with information, background, and resources for parents and professionals about collaborative problem solving. So that website is a really good source. So when you are dealing with a challenging behavior, a lot of times when I was working with kids in therapeutic foster care, sometimes a parent would say to me, this behavior just came out of nowhere. I don't know, why are they doing this all of a sudden? Why are they back, they were doing really well and now they're wetting the bed again, or they were doing really well and now they're arguing with me about every single chore they have to do, or they were getting into fights again at school, right? So sometimes parents would say to me, I don't know where this is coming from. It seems like it's coming out of nowhere. So let me just assure you that there's always a driver. There's always a reason why you have a challenging behavior. There's always a reason why there's a struggle there. There's always something behind that behavior. And a lot of times that behavior, that challenging behavior, is a survival skill that child has learned to try to deal with, it's a survival skill that child has developed, and it may not be a particularly healthy one, or it may not even be completely effective, but somehow it's kind of worked for them, so they're going to keep doing it because it's what they know to do, right? So sometimes sometimes I think of myself as a friendly detective when I'm doing therapies, like figuring out what's driving this behavior, what's the struggle, right? So with collaborative problem solving, there are steps here that can help you figure out what's going on. In this first section where it talks about CPS in a nutshell, there are 3 steps. The first one is the empathy step. This is an information gathering step to help you have a real understanding of what this child's concern is, or a perspective about an unsolved problem. For example, it says completion of homework or chores, maybe fighting with siblings, taking care of, their hygiene needs, how much time they're on their system gaming. That's probably like a big one a lot of parents deal with, right? And please get off your phone. Your face is in your phone 24 hours a day. That's a current challenge. So an empathy statement is basically a statement that lets that child know, I'm listening. I want to hear your point of view. I want to understand. If you go onto the website, the Think Kids website, it will give you some examples of empathy statements. But an empathy statement just says, I'm here, I'm listening. I'm going to try to reserve any judgment or any frustration or anger that I'm feeling right now because I want to hear your point of view. I know as parents, when our children have challenging behaviors, it feels like it's aimed at us. It feels like it's an attack at us, right? And so it's very hard sometimes as a parent, to not let your own emotions get swept up in trying to understand this behavior and trying to help your child work through it. So the empathy statement is a way to help you deal with that. It can be something like, it seems like you're having a really hard time getting your homework done. How can I help? What's going on? Or, so there's no judgment there. There's no, hey, why aren't you getting your homework done? And I think if you could see how those 2 statements feel different, like, why aren't you getting your homework done? There's kind of an implied it feels accusatory, right? Whereas an empathy statement, it seems to me, and you're keeping it focused on your words, your feelings, it seems to me, or it seems like you're really having a hard time with your math homework. It seems like this is a struggle for you all the time. What can I do? How can I help? What's going on? And sometimes, you know, kids will go, I don't know. Oh, math is hard. Math is stupid, right? So sometimes it takes a little bit deeper digging to really, you're probably not going to really get to the root of the problem with that first empathy statement. I mean, it would be nice if you just laid that out and they went, oh, yes, all right. I'm ready to tell you everything that's bothering me. No, that's not going to happen, sorry. But it's a good first step, right? One thing that I will tell you when I work with kids, especially this age, I feel like sometimes the best thing that I do for that kid is give them an hour of undivided time and attention with an adult that they trust. I know this is an age, especially, you know, teenagers is an age when they tend to stop communicating, when they tend to withdraw and isolate. Some of that's developmentally appropriate, but when we talk a little bit later about substance abuse, we'll talk about the point where that could get to be a concern, because that could be an indicator to you that something else is going on with them. But just being there, just saying, here, I'm here for you. I'm going to put my phone aside. I'm going to turn off the TV. I'm going to just, this time is for you to talk to me about what's going on and how I can support you. So the empathy statement. So then the second step is define the problem step. So this is where you as an adult can present your concerns. Because most kids are going to go, well, I don't need math. Did you have to like do some trigonometry at your job today? Maybe you did. I didn't. So, but you as a parent with a much larger, more life experience and a larger frame, understand, yeah, there is an importance to grade. There is grades. This is important. And so defining the problem is where both parties, you and your child, get to state their concerns. So you as a parent can share your concerns, and then the child shares their concerns. And so the point in this is to kind of get to a middle ground. And I know this is like, sounds easy. It's good, but that doesn't mean it's not still tough. And this is a point where maybe you as a parent kind of have to try to step back a little bit from the emotion of that moment and just, you know, really be willing to hear. The third step is the negotiation or mutually agreeable solution step. This third step involves having the child and the adult sort of brainstorm, suggest solutions so that they can both arrive at a plan of action that's realistic and it satisfies both people, a solution that addresses both concerns. So the important part about this stage is no idea is a bad idea at first, right? So let's say you get to this point and the kid's, oh, I've got a solution, I just don't take math anymore. Or, you know, my solution is I don't take math, I don't do math anymore, right? Well, you and I know that's not a solution. But at this point, what you're doing is you're brainstorming ideas. And so this is the point where you're not going to say no to anything, but after all the ideas are out on the table, then you go back and you look at them. Okay, so if you were to just drop out of math and not take math anymore, is there anything positive that would come out of that? And the kid will go, yeah, I don't want to do math anymore, right? But you look through each solution and each party gets to sort of express their thoughts and ideas about why that would be valuable or why it wouldn't be valuable. So another thing that CPS does is it really increases and supports communication, because those communication skills, the relationship between parent and child, especially in the teenage years, is so important. So I'm not going to like read through this entire sheet, but I think you guys can read it on your own. Really briefly, on the back page, it talks about Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. So basically, what this is different approaches to dealing with challenging behaviors within the CPS framework. So basically, Plan A is kind of the plan that probably most of us have been going with, which is basically you're going to say what I do, you're going to do what I say because you're my kid, right? Has that worked really well for everybody? Everybody had 100% success with that? No? Because usually that's where the rebellion kicks in, right? So I know sometimes for parents, this can initially sound like I'm releasing my control as a parent or I'm handing over my control as a parent. And that's not true. As you read a little bit more into this, if it's something that you think is valuable to you, you're not relinquishing your control, but what you're doing is you're not allowing yourself to be drawn into a power struggle. So there is, and I'm sure most of you, especially if you've had teenagers or even little ones, have got drawn into that power struggle, and all of a sudden you realize you're having this huge argument with your kid, and everybody's getting upset, and it ends with tears or yelling or whatever, and nothing has been solved. So CPS is a way of getting kids more engaged in decisions about their life, giving them the appropriate amount of control for whatever their age is. When I use CPS, I've used it with little kids, with like 5 and 6 year olds, you know. Of course, it's different. There needs to be a little more. It needs to be more parental guidance if they're really young, but it can work with little ones too. So Plan A is kind of just I'm going to impose my will upon you, and so that doesn't necessarily work very well most of the time. Plan C is when adults just decide, you know what, I'm going to cut you a little slack here, and we're going to drop an expectation for now. Sometimes one of the challenges that I ran into with families is that they had multiple expectations that their kids were not meeting. And so it's like, okay, well, let's talk about what's the most important one. What's the most challenging behavior? What's the one that we really want to look at first that's really causing the most problem? And maybe some of those others, we just kind of set them aside for now, and then we come back to them. Plan B is really the heart of CPS, with adults and kids working together to solve problems in mutually satisfactory and realistic ways. Basically, it involves 4 steps: identifying and understanding the child's concern about the problem, identifying and sharing the adult's concerns about the same issue. The child is invited in step 3 to brainstorm solutions together. And then the 4th and final step is where the child and adult will work together to assess potential solutions and choose one that is both realistically and mutually satisfactory. So I'm just giving you guys the high points for people. When I did this training, it was like a multiple day training, so it's just the high points. But I have given this to you because I think this is incredibly valuable in really being able to understand what's behind those challenging behaviors and understand how to address them and how to work through them. So, I don't know, am I getting close to the end of my time? Okay. So, I was also asked to talk a little bit about substance abuse. So I want to talk about that in this framework really quickly. I think just like CPS encourages, the communication with your child is so, so important. The relationship is so, so important. Working in the school that I do, I hear about drug combinations and things that I didn't even know about existed, right? So sometimes I think I wish they could be as creative about, use their creativity for other more positive things, because it kind of blows my mind sometimes at things that kids come up with to put into their bodies. But having that open communication is really important. And also, I think another most important thing is to be aware of what the signs are. For example, if you see that your child suddenly has a new or different group of friends, different peers that you've not seen them spending time with before, changes in behavior, mood swings, changes in eating and sleeping patterns, if all of a sudden they're like up all the time or all of a sudden they're sleeping all the time. If you have a kid that used to be quite a good eater and now they have no appetite, or maybe even the opposite of that, those could be signs that something there's potential for substance use. Changes in their academic performance, changes in their relationships with the family. If you had a kid that was very open and loving, and all of a sudden they're arguing with you all the time. They're angry. They're fighting with their siblings. Any kind of big changes like that could be a signifier that there's something going on with them. And it may not necessarily be substance use, but those are big signs to look for. There's lots of resources and support for parents. We have lots of great community services here. And I'm just going to finish there. Thank you.
Hey, Steve.
Again, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the panel after they've all completed. So be thinking about those questions, and if you would like a note card or anything like that to be able to jot down the notes of a question that you may have, if you just raise your hand, we've got people that will come around and be able to give you a note card that you can actually write those on. Now we have Mr. Steve Hahn with the Parent-Child Center of Tulsa. Steve is the director of the Anti-Bullying Collaboration, a program of the Parent-Child Center of Tulsa, whose mission is to prevent bullying amongst children, youth, and adults in our community. During the past 18 years, Steve has been committed to helping youth and adults develop pro-social skills leading to positive life outcomes. He serves as the Vice President of Advocacy for Oklahoma PTA. Steve holds a Master's of Science degree from Oklahoma State University and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Oral Roberts University. Steve.
Thank you, sir. And Jeff, we also have protective factors. I don't know if they're on the slide there, but I think Derek has some protective factors that we would like to be shown. So, you're here because you love kids, right? Yes. That's why we're here. We're here, even if you're a kid, you're here because you love your parent. That's why I'm here as well. My wife also teaches in Broken Arrow Schools. Gail Hahn is somewhere in the room. She's a teacher at Sequoia Middle School. There she is back there. We have a student who is in 8th grade and a student who is in 10th grade. And I tell you what, as a parent, dropping my kid off in pre-K was a big deal. Dropping my kid off in 6th grade was a big deal. Dropping my kid off at the 9th grade center was a big deal. Dropping my kid off at the high school, the senior high, for me was a big deal. I don't know about you, but with those, next moves up, sometimes I felt my kid just slip away just a little bit more for some reason, maybe out of my reach. But that's how I felt as a parent with those transitions at time. I'm here to talk a little bit about peer pressure, and I'm here to talk about peer abuse. I'm going to talk about peer pressure, though, through a mental health lens. If you've not read the book, Hold On to Your Kids, by Gabor Mate and Gordon Newfield, I strongly suggest that you pick that up because Gabor and Gordon talk about peer pressure in an exceedingly different way. But they start out their talk regarding peer pressure along the notion of orientation. How many of you have heard of the term orientation when it comes to peer pressure? Neither had I. I mean, not a lot of you shook your head. Yes, just one. But the idea here that every kid needs someone to orient to. And what I'm going to say is they need a compass point. Kids are looking for and kids need someone to help them understand who they are as a person and how much they matter. They also need someone to take their cues from, to know how to be and what to do. They also need to know what to do to understand what is important and what is expected. Now look, as a parent, those orientation pieces, I hope my kids view me as a compass point. I hope they view another adult in their life as a compass point, a teacher, a coach, a Sunday school teacher, someone else who they can attach to gain their morals, ethics, and values. We call those kids that attach to adults and stay attached adult-oriented kids. That means they've attached to you, they look to you for morals, values, and ethics. When they're in the peer setting, when they're making decisions that could be problematic, they think about you. I mean, think about it. Growing up, adults in the room, because of your adult attachments, did you think about how your decisions would affect your relationships with your parents, with your teachers, with your coaches? That's what we call being adult-oriented. At the same time, when you're adult-oriented, when you're a kid growing up, you can repel or reject the negative influence of your peers just a little bit better. Doesn't mean you're not going to make a decision that's not the best every now and then, but you're well-equipped to do so. Now, on the flip side of the coin, there are kids who are peer-oriented. Now, guess what that means? That means they attach to their peers for what? Morals, ethics, and values. Just like they would attach to an adult, peer-oriented kids attach to other peers who are often mature, who don't have the same life experience, who can't give the best advice, but at the same time, like adult-oriented kids repel negative influences from their peers, guess who peer-oriented kids repel? The adults. So it can be challenging because you know who your kids hang out with. Are they conventional peers? Do they have goals in place? Are they doing their best at school? Are they in sports or extracurricular activities? Are they involved with a group, a club, something outside of school? What's happening? Or are they attached to children who are experimenting with drugs, children who are experimenting with sexual behaviors, children who aren't making the best decisions at that time in their life? Now, this is important, too, because as our kids grow up, I'm seeing my own son. He's a sophomore. I see him getting bigger. I see him making decisions. I see him making decisions that can affect the rest of his life. I see him making the grades. I see him looking at colleges. I see him doing those things because I like to think as a parent we've helped him toward those choices and decisions, toward college, toward school, towards making the grade. But you know what? He needs more help. It can't just be me. It just can't be his parent. It has to be you. It has to be a coach. It has to be an instructor. It has to be someone else to help guide him through that life. Now, with peer-oriented kids, what we find is that's where peer pressure really exists because there's a vulnerability there. Because I'm no longer trying to, live up to the standards of the parents in my life, my parents or my teachers or my coach. I'm living up to the standards of my peers. And with that, that creates a lot of tension and a lot of vulnerability. So if I don't live up to the standards of my peers, if I don't meet their expectations, what happens to me? What happens to that relationship? There's something that's called an attachment alarm. And it happens when kids are attached to adults and when kids are attached to other kids. There's this feeling that, if I don't make the right decision here, I could jeopardize the relationship that I have with this person. It happens with adults, it happens with kids. In a peer pressure situation, that attachment alarm is a point of stress. You have a diagram in your packet. Some of you do have a packet. There's some out on the table when you leave. But it outlines an unstable relationship cycle that kids enter into when they are attached to other peers. It's based on instability. So if I'm attached to my peer, it's an unstable relationship. There are expectations there that are involved that I meet the expectation of my peer group. That generates stress. That generates fear of loss because if I don't do what the peer group expects, I could lose that position among my peers. Now, that also leads to destructive behavior as well because if I'm attached to my peer group and if I'm not attached to an adult, if I've rejected that influence in my life, that could lead me toward destructive behaviors as well. Behaviors that may bring pleasure in the moment, ultimately, but could have immediate negative effects in the present and in the long term over the life course as well. And that puts you right back up, unstable relationships. So here's the notion of adult-oriented kids versus peer-oriented kids. One accepts something or attaches to something and rejects the other. There's a saying, you can't serve two masters. You love one and you hate the other. That's the imagery that is involved with peer-oriented kids. They will reject. And that's a puzzling feeling to experience as an adult. You want the best for your child. You want the best for that student. You reach out to them. You want to be that person that's their mentor. You want to be that role model. But what you're experiencing is because of peer orientation, you're experiencing that rejection. And it's hard to come to grips with that. That's why if your child doesn't attach to you in a way that you want he or she to, as parents, we need to look to other adults for assistance as well. Who is close to your child? Who can you guide and lead them toward to be that person who can be the compass point in their life to help form a perception about, hey, what is expected? So that's a little bit about peer orientation versus adult orientation. Read Gabor Mate's. Listen, that book, Hold On to Your Kids, has been one of the best books I've read, in the past 18 years. So here's the notion of peer abuse. When you're talking about bullying, we look at it through a mental health lens as well. Peer abuse, it happens when children abuse other children, which is an interesting way to look at things. It happens when children abuse other children. And you can get the imagery of adult abusing a child, but to see that a child abuses another child is a different way to look at that. For our purposes tonight, I'll define bullying as this. A few parts to it. Number one, a need to dominate, plus a hardening against empathy and caring, plus exploiting vulnerabilities in others equals peer abuse. So it's a need to dominate, a hardening against empathy and caring, and exploiting vulnerabilities in other or peer abuse. Now, there's all kinds of academic definitions. The state has a definition. The CDC has a definition. Academy of Pediatrics has a definition, and on and on and on. But this, talking about dominance, talking about a hardening of emotions, talking about exploiting vulnerabilities in others, is a different way to look at the phenomena of bullying. Now, peer orientation has a role here as well, and this is on page 2 in the handout if you have it. So, peer orientation increases frustration in a child, and it also decreases the likelihood of finding peaceful alternatives to aggression. So if I'm a peer-oriented kid, I'm trying to satisfy the desires of my peers, but I can't quite get there in some instances because I'm always alarmed that I'm going to lose that attachment to them. So it's a frustrating experience as a kid. And guess what? Research also shows that when people are stressed out or having a bad day, they tend to mistreat or bully others as well. So they're right there in that space where it's an emotional response. They're diving deep into the brainstem, deep into that reptilian side where it's a fight at all cost for these kids. Adult-oriented youth are more likely to keep their impulses to attack others in check with a desire not to hurt others, a desire to be good, and an awareness of consequences. Here's the deal with adult-oriented kids. In the back of their mind, they're weighing what you would say and think about their actions. Now, that doesn't mean adult-oriented kids don't bully other kids, but it means they're thinking about you. They're thinking about you, and what that does is it buffers behavior. The more peer-oriented a child is, the less likely he is to feel apprehensive or cautious. They're not thinking about you. They're not thinking about what you say as a parent. They're not thinking about what you say as a teacher. They're totally oblivious, and they don't care because they're not attached to you. Because of a lack of adult attachment, peer-oriented youth are less likely to seek help from adults when abused by their peers as well. And that's the other thing. We want our kids to talk to us. We want our kids to bring us their problems. We want that relationship to move forward. Now, this gets tricky too, because as a kid gets older, we know they're maturing, they're solving problems on their own. We expect them to do that. They're driving, they're dating, they're going to all that stuff. And so we have this piece where we want them to seek our help, but with peer-oriented kids, because they're not attached, they don't seek the help. Then the opposite is true. Because of adult orientation, youth are more likely to seek out an adult for support and intervention. Here's my question to everybody, every adult in the room. Who seeks you out? Which child or teenager is that? Who seeks you out? Who wants to be near you? Who wants to be with you? Who seeks your approval? That kid is asking you, will you be my support? In a lot of situations, that kid is asking you, will you be my mentor? Not everybody can be a mentor to kids. We can all be role models, but the child will choose you. That's how it works. They choose you. And especially teachers and parents and coaches in the room, if you work with youth, look for those kids who are near, because that proximity is exceedingly important. They want to be with you. And you're in an exceedingly important place to speak into their life in ways that no one else can. And at some instances, not even a way their parent can. And so it's an exceedingly important place. So talking about the protective factors as well. Number one, preserve your attachment with your child or student. Preserve it. Bigger bodies don't mean mature decisions. Licenses don't mean mature decisions. This is a time in a youth, when a kid is a teenager, when they're making decisions that it could impact the rest of their life in a positive or negative way. Draw a little closer. And that can be challenging as kids get older. They're involved in more extracurricular. They seem to be out of the house. But pull a little closer to your kid intentionally. So number one, preserve your attachment with your child or student. Number two, consistently listen and be responsive to your child or student to preserve trust. Being heard is exceedingly important. I mean, as adults, how do we feel when we don't feel heard? When we don't feel like the other person really has acknowledged us as a human being and is intentionally seeking to understand us. That's why this is exceedingly important. Consistently listen and be responsive to your child or student to preserve trust. Prying information from your teen takes considerable amount of time and energy. I mean, that's the alternative. To try and pry. I mean, how many of us have been there? We've tried to pry it out of them. Come on, give me that. I want it, I need it. But they're like, no, not going to do it. Hoping things will work out somehow is risky business. It's risky business. 3, last one. Identify and practice emotional regulation strategies as a family or a classroom norm when dealing with problems. A lot of our kids, a lot of our adults, we're not emotionally literate. We have a few different things. We're angry, we're frustrated, we're sad. We don't have a vocabulary to express how we're feeling. And a lot of us go to the same types of behavioral response when we are pushed in the same way. When you think about kids and bullying, kids know what buttons to push over and over again. So emotional recognition and emotional management is for students, and it's for adults as well, because sometimes they see that the same expectations that we place on them as adults, we don't act or behave in the same way. Thank you.
Next, we have Emily Farmer with COPES from Family and Children's Services. Emily is the Youth Suicide Prevention Specialist, master's degree in social work from the University of Kansas, and is a licensed clinical social worker. She has worked as a school-based therapist with Family and Children's Services and as an admission counselor at Brookhaven Hospital. Emily.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all, for having us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about these topics that are so important. Right now, I'm going to talk about depression and suicide prevention, and those are kind of wrapped together as I talk, but I want to be clear that just because someone has a mental health diagnosis or struggles with mental illness does not mean that they will definitely become suicidal or have suicidal thoughts. And just because someone has suicidal thoughts doesn't mean that they suffer from mental illness. So just keep that in mind as we're talking. I'll talk about risk factors and warning signs for depression that you guys can look out for. And then how to have conversations with your kids and basically what you can do as parents to help prevent your kiddos from struggling. First, we all know that mental health is a continuing concern, is a growing concern in our communities. COPES, the Division of Family and Children's Services that I work for, is our community outreach psychiatric emergency services. It's a 24/7 hotline that's free for anyone to call who's in crisis. And we mean that as in kids who are in crisis, parents who are in crisis because they have really significant concerns for their kiddos. So that is a resource that I want you guys to make sure that y'all know is out there for support. Because a lot of times when we're struggling and when our kids are struggling, we need someone to turn to know what to do. So usually with kiddos that suffer from depression, there are some risk factors that we know are in place. We don't have it narrowed down to a science as in like, if this happens, then you're going to suffer from depression, or if this happens, then you're going to have suicidal thoughts. It's not that easy. It's more complicated because we're all so different. But what I can say is that there are certain risk factors that we know increases someone's likelihood of suffering. So the first one is physical differences and biological differences, meaning differences in brain structure, differences in genetics. They're doing a lot of research still, and so we continue to see that those things are associated with a greater likelihood for depression and also suicidal thoughts. Historical factors, so if you think about the things that your kiddo has been through in their life and what they perceive as something that was a struggle or as trauma, those things, if you can kind of tick off a list of tough stuff that they might have struggled with, you can know that those things are risk factors and increase their likelihood to continue to struggle. We also know that sometimes physical health and medical issues can put someone at higher risk. So if you have something going on medically, I always tell kids, if you are great at a sport and that's your kind of life plan to do that sport, to get scholarships, maybe even play professionally, and then you break your arm and you can never play again, that's a good example of how, because a lot of times we think of medical issues having to do with older adults, but that's a good example of how that could affect a kiddo. And then current stressors are also another risk factor. So the things that they're dealing with in their life at that moment, a lot of times that's all we see when we talk to a kiddo who's struggling, because that's the last thing that, that's the last thing that we know that they're dealing with. But those, like I said, are not always the case as far as what's actually causing that crisis. What do you guys think that research shows is the biggest stressor for high school students? Any ideas? Any high school students know the answer to that? She pointed at her daughter.
Got one raising her.
Oh, go ahead, shout it out. Homework? Yes, exactly. Nail on the head right there. School stuff, school stressors, especially with your older high school kiddos, you're starting to think about your future and you are worrying about grades and tests. Yeah? Like comparing yourself to others and not feeling like you fit in because you don't have the right kind of belongings. Yeah, so that's kind of like social relationships and social issues. Those are kind of the two biggest current stressors that a lot of times our students will identify. Other ones include family conflict, anything going on at home. A lot of times as adults we think stuff going on with us doesn't affect our kiddos, but we see the trickle down if there's conflict between parents or guardians, or if there's a big job change or a move. Any of those things are usually big stressors for kids. So those are kind of the risk factors that you can be aware of with your kiddos, but then I do want to talk about the warning signs that you can look for. So warning signs that they might be struggling. And what we talk about with depression, we usually look at changes in their mood, changes in their behavior, or changes in the things that they're talking about and the way that they're talking. So the key word is changes. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about are like, well, that's kind of how she's always been, or that's her personality trait. And that's a little bit different. So keep in mind that these things are actually changes that you might have picked up on or noticed. As far as the way that a kiddo is talking, basically the things that are coming out of their mouths might start to sound really hopeless. You would notice if they were saying things like, oh, things will never get better. I can't handle this. I'm never going to be able to do this. Those really drastic statements that can kind of seem benign and are honestly pretty common with high school students can be warning signs. Now, another thing I want to mention is that a lot of the things I'm talking about you're going to be like, well, that's normal for high schoolers. But I'm not talking about any of these things in isolation. So as we go over the warning signs, we're talking about more than one, more than just that one thing that you notice that you're like, well, that's probably pretty normal. But if you can kind of think about what's been going on with your kiddo and go through a list, then your concern should increase with the amount of warning signs that you see. So the really negative statements, they can range from something as benign as, I can't do this anymore, this is never going to work out for me, all the way up into really specific statements about not wanting to live anymore. So any of those things that they might even just kind of slip into conversation or might slip out when they're frustrated are going to be things to think about. Then we're talking about their mood changes, and once again, you're like, high schoolers are moody, we get it, hormones. Yeah, that's true. But think about what they've been dealing with lately and if there's been a big shift in their mood. We all tend to think about depression as someone who's really kind of down and sad, maybe tearful, alone in the corner. But what I do want to make clear is that irritability in depression is actually really common with high schoolers, and especially sometimes with males. So if you have a male in your home, and I don't like to put people in a box like that, especially when it comes to gender, but we do need to know, like, if you have a high school age boy in your home and he starts acting like a jerk, aggressive, verbally aggressive, stomping around, and he's never been like that before, that's a warning sign. Just the same as if he or she suddenly becomes more tearful and quiet and isolating. Those are the main mood changes that we would see would be kind of irritability and aggression and sadness. But then also students more and more have been talking to me about feeling numb, just not feeling anything. And you can imagine literally feeling nothing, like sitting there thinking, I know I should be happy in this moment because something good has happened, but I'm not. I'm just not. And the flip of that, where usually this would make me mad, or I should be upset, but I'm just not because I don't feel anything. So if you notice any of that, those are another one of your warning signs to look out for. And then the way that they're acting. And as parents, honestly, the first thing that's probably going to happen if your kiddo's at risk for depression or suicide is you're going to have this moment of like, what's your deal? Like, it's not going to be like, oh yes, that goes in my list of warning signs for suicide or depression. No, you're gonna be like, why is he acting like a jerk? Or like, what's her problem today? And that's when you go back through and you think about what's actually going on now. So with those behaviors, really impulsive, dangerous behaviors that we haven't seen before, withdrawing from things that they used to care about is a big one with high school age students. Used to be really into basketball, team captain, a leader, never late for practice, and now he isn't even showing up and doesn't care and is about to be kicked off the team, or not going to that weekly hangout that you usually know that they have with their friends, not even wanting to get out of bed, and withdrawing from family too, being in their room all the time. Some of this is normal high school kid stuff, and that's what makes it so tough. But when it's in combination with these other things, that's when we know there's concern and reasons for concern. So as we talk about those things, then it's like, well, what do I do as a parent? And we put a lot on you guys in this presentation, these protective factors, but you are a big piece of the puzzle, and just sitting down to have a conversation when you notice these warning signs and you know there's risk factors is huge. And this means a conversation where you're not distracted by anything else, where you are listening, where you put aside the time. So it's not like, oh, I got to do this, I have 5 minutes before I have to run out the door. No, if you're going to have a conversation with your kiddo about serious stuff, set aside the time to do that, and ask them what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. I've noticed this. Are you doing okay? And see where the conversation goes. And don't do that thing that we all do where we're like not really listening because we're thinking about the next thing we're going to say. Do that thing where you actually try to pick up on what's going on with them and try to identify. Mainly because suicide, if a kiddo's thinking about suicide, they see that as a solution to a problem. So we need to get down to what's the problem here. So we need to be listening for what's actually going on. So have that conversation. And if they say some things, yeah, I'm really struggling with this and this and this, and I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Then it's okay to ask if they've had thoughts of suicide. There's a big myth, and that is that we don't want to talk about it. Because we don't want to cause them to do it. We don't want to put that thought in their mind. That is a myth. Research shows that we have to have these conversations. Our kids these days, they hear enough about suicide in their everyday life, on social media, that you're not going to put any new ideas in their head. And if you are brave enough to deal with that awkward feeling of, oh my gosh, I got to ask this question, this is really tough, you deal with that awkwardness because your kiddo might be struggling. So sit with that awkwardness and ask the question. Because y'all can imagine, I've had moments where I was struggling and I felt a flooding of relief when someone took the time to check in with me. I wasn't necessarily angry if they were wrong. You know, they'll say, no, I'm good. It hasn't gotten to that point, or it hasn't gotten that bad. Your kiddo's going to feel relieved and they're going to feel cared about. And then you'll know where to go from there as far as how to help them. And then if they do identify that they're having those kind of thoughts, you're going to reach out. You're going to reach out to a mental health provider. You're going to call your insurance to see who's covered and how you can get that scheduled. You're going to call COPES. You might call your pastor if that feels comfortable for you. You're going to stay with that kiddo and keep them safe and have family time with them so that they feel cared about and that they're monitored. And you're going to reach out. So before you have that conversation, have an idea in mind of some of those places that you trust to reach out to. A couple more things to keep in mind. It takes a village. When kids are struggling, the most common thing I hear was, I had no idea they were struggling like that. No clue. They seemed fine. That's because as parents, you get one piece of the picture, and there are people throughout your kiddo's day that see them for a longer period of time than you do. There's teachers, there's friends. So, and we all, maybe are like, well, I noticed she was moody, but I thought that was just hormones. But if you take that opportunity to communicate with your village there, check in with the coach, check in with the teacher, check in with the friends' parents whose houses they might be hanging out at, and just say, hey, have you noticed anything different with so-and-so? Because when we see kids struggling, it's really hard to know that they're truly struggling until you have the full picture. Because as a parent, you might notice the mood change, but guess what? The track coach noticed that they were not caring about track anymore and showing up late. Their friend noticed that they weren't even sitting together at lunch anymore, and they thought that was kind of weird, but wasn't that big of a deal. The teacher noticed that their grades had dropped and they were more tearful, but they just chalk that up to normal high school mood swings too. So until we get the full picture of what's going on, it's really hard to know what we're dealing with and what kind of conversation we need to have. So one last note, and it's a little soapbox, it's social media. Take things on social media seriously, ask questions about what your kid's posting on social media, monitor it, and also have them take breaks from their phone. I think about back in the day, I had a cell phone, but I couldn't do anything on it besides call people. And so every night when I go home, it's like I had, however long, 12 hours before I had to go back to school and start dealing with all that stress again. So a lot of us grew up getting that break from everything, that break from school stress, that break from friend drama. Your kids likely don't get that same kind of break from everything else that's going on to recharge. So that's a thought, that's something to think about, is sometimes it might be helpful to give them that opportunity to take a break from their phone and everything in their outside world and just have family time and focus on each other, because that can be really pretty beneficial. Just trust your gut and don't be afraid to have tough conversations with kids if you're concerned. Own that awkwardness. We got to ask questions to get the answers we need. So you deal with your awkwardness. And like I said, find a way to reach out to the other people that have a piece of your kiddo's day. And then I think kind of like what you were saying, trusted adults are huge, and your kiddo might not have attached or have as much of an attachment to you as they have to other people. So that's another conversation to have, is who do you trust if you are struggling to talk to? Are there adults besides parents? Of course, we want them to come to you, but in their toughest moments, sometimes it's not going to be you. So you can have that conversation of like, who else is out there that you would talk to, and who else is out there that you would trust if you really needed someone to go to, because they need more of that community connection, and the more people that they have kind of caring about them, the better. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Emily. And now we have Carrie Gibson with Family and Children Services. She has served since 2010 as a clinical supervisor for school-based services at Family and Children Services Incorporated. Previously, she was a school-based therapist. She also has worked doing SWIFT adoption studies and worked for 5 years as a child therapist in the abuse program at Family and Children Services beginning in 1997. Carrie.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to reiterate what Emily said. We really are excited to have you guys here tonight. I think it's a first step that parents are interested in hearing how they can help their kids. And we put up the protective factors because these same things, if you can do these things for your kids, are going to help in all of these areas. You know, there is a lot of common ground in everything that we're talking about tonight in our tips on how you can, what you can do to help. And so, you know, really paying attention to those protective factors is going to make a big difference in your child's life and in your relationship with that child. And I do want to say, I know we've talked a little bit about teenagers, but young kids too. Teenagers kind of tend to push us away a little bit as they get older, and that's natural. You know, they're supposed to develop their identity and who they're going to be, you know, but they still need us, and your role is vital in their lives. And sometimes they don't tell us that, and sometimes they don't appreciate it, and sometimes they don't even acknowledge that they're going to need that, but they do need you, and so that's huge. So I'm here to talk about anxiety tonight, and anxiety is often kind of looked at as maybe fear or worry, but I find that it's a little bit difficult when you're talking about our kids having a problem with anxiety, because anxiety is normal and anxiety is healthy. You know, if we didn't worry about anything, we'd be running out in the streets, getting hit by cars. You know, it's healthy to have a certain level of anxiety. If I didn't have any anxiety, we probably wouldn't get up and go to work. We wouldn't have any worry about paying our bills. So there is a healthy level of anxiety. So I think that makes it a little tricky to be able to tell when it's gone over the edge. So, you know, you really want to look for fear or worry, but also, like Emily said, it can show up as irritability or anger or even some defiance, because they feel so worried and anxious about maybe something happening that they can't follow your instructions. So it does have a little bit of a broader look, you know, to be paying attention to those things as well. But we really want to look at, is it impacting their functioning? And so is it getting in the way of them being able to have fun, to spend time with friends, to spend time with family, to participate in the things that they enjoy, whether that's sports or music or whatever? Is it getting in the way of them being able to attend school? Is it getting in the way of them being able to get good grades and those kinds of things? So that's when we would worry about the anxiety, that maybe it's gone, it's something that they're not able to handle and it's not healthy anymore. So there's several different types of anxiety, and so I don't need to go too much into that, but you know, you can have kind of a generalized anxiety where you worry about lots of different things. Maybe you're worried about grades, maybe you're worried about peer relationships. Maybe you're worried about missing school or being late or someone being upset with you. And it kind of spreads over a wide variety of things. And then you can have more specific anxieties like certain phobias, like you're scared of spiders or heights, or you can have a separation anxiety where there's a lot of anxiety around being away from a certain caregiver. So there's lots of different types of anxiety, but I think they all tend to, it all revolves around that worry, that fear, that can also look like anger or irritability as well. So why kids experience anxiety is sometimes a big question. Why would my kid have anxiety? I would say there is some genetic component to that. If a parent, it tends to be a little bit more on the anxious side. Sometimes their kids tend to be a little bit more on the anxious side. And I guess it's hard to tell exactly if that's genetics or if they learned it from their parent, because you can do both. You can, if you're kind of an anxious parent and you're worried about stuff, sometimes that passes on to your child. Your child can feel that. And they sort of learn that as well. But there can be a little bit of a genetic component in that too. But there's stressors in our lives. I think as adults and children, and like Emily brought up with social media, they maybe don't get the break that maybe we used to get growing up from some of those stressors. So that could compound it as well. But there's stress to perform at school, getting the grades, we talked about that. Stress to perform in certain activities. There's a lot of kids that put a lot of pressure on themselves to be the best at certain activities that they're involved in. And when they don't meet that expectation, that puts a lot of anxiety on them. And they feel a lot of stress from that. There may be stressful events that might increase anxiety, like if they're going through certain changes like moving, divorce, separation of the parents, maybe changing schools, death or loss of a loved one. There's a lot of different life events that might cause someone to feel more anxiety than they normally feel. We talked about peer pressure. Steve talked about peer pressure and peer abuse, but a lot of kids feel stress from trying to impress the kids around them and trying to fit in. We talked about that a second ago. And sometimes that's their own stuff that they put on themselves, like they think they have to be a certain way. And sometimes other kids might say things that might increase that anxiety. And then sometimes financial worries. Sometimes if a parent's going through a lot of financial stress, that could put some stress on kids, but also as kids grow up, maybe they have some financial worries of their own. Like maybe they are starting to drive and they need to be able to pay for things, and they've got a job now. And so they have to balance the work and school and different activities going on. And then like Emily said, when they're getting ready for college or getting ready to graduate and getting ready to be an adult, all the stress that's involved in that as well. So I think other than the protective factors that are up here, there's a few things that you guys can do to help if you feel like your child is maybe having a little bit too much anxiety or it's affecting them, or even to prevent maybe some anxiety. You want to be able to be careful about how you talk to kids and talk around kids about the stress that's going on in your life. Like I said a minute ago, you can influence, your stress can pass on to them. And so if you're under a lot of financial stress or you're under a lot of maybe you're having relationship difficulties, be careful what you say to them about that, but also be careful that you don't talk around them about that too, because they're listening, they're paying attention way more than you realize that they are. And, we want to make sure that the kids are not having adult worries when we want to let them be kids and let us worry about the financial stuff, because you're a child and you don't have to worry about that part, whether we can pay the water bill or something, So making sure that we're not passing those worries on to the kids. Be careful when your child is worried that you try to remain calm. You know, if someone's getting ramped up and they're getting worried, and then we're coming in and we're getting worried, that's only going to amp up that situation. They really need us to remain calm, sort of like the compass. You know, they need someone to remain, you know, this is okay, we got this, you can get through this, I can help you. You know, someone that can kind of encourage them and keep them, you know, kind of coming back down again. Be sure to praise the successes that you see them make. Some kids are more sensitive to and need that encouragement a little more than others. Every kid is different, but being sure to praise what you see them doing well, and even praise their efforts, to even if their result wasn't the best, because sometimes that's going to encourage them that they can do well and that they'll try hard next time. So helping them build that confidence so that they can deal with stress and situations. When your child's feeling anxious, maybe encourage them to do some relaxing activity. And that could be a variety of different things. It could be yoga, it could be going for a walk, it could be taking deep breaths, talking to somebody, maybe journaling. There's a lot of different ways they can get through that worry. But I think if you've got a child who tends to worry, it's going to be really important for them to learn how to regulate that, because that's probably something they're going to need throughout their life. And if we can help teach them that skill, they're going to be able to use that next time they start to get worried, and they won't need someone to help them every time. Does that make sense? So, let's see, I think I have one more tip here. If you find that your child is starting to experience anxiety that's affecting their quality of life, and you know, you feel like it's kind of something that is more than what you can help them with, or you're trying these things and it's just not working, you know, that's when you may want to seek out some help. Whether that is seeking out the school counselor to find out what resources might be available at the school, whether it's calling a professional counselor to get them involved in some counseling to try to learn how to handle that anxiety, or a pastor at a church, or you know, to kind of help guide in that situation. But it's okay to ask for help. Again, all of those situations, we really want to be able to teach kids how to handle their anxiety so that they can take those skills and use them when the anxiety starts to overwhelm them in other situations. So, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. This panel, they've done a really, really good job, and we do appreciate you being here and lending your expertise and giving us some information that I think everybody will be able to take with them and help them out. If you have a question of the panel, this is the question and answer portion of this segment. If you would like to just ask the question, we have microphones down here. It helps for everybody to be able to hear what the question is. If not, if you'd rather not go up to the microphone, we do have some people that will have index cards for you to be able to write a question out, and I'll ask the question for you. I already have some that have been asked in advance, so we'll kind of go through those and give you an opportunity to maybe these will answer the questions that you have, or if you have something specific that you'd like to ask. Let's see. My kid doesn't seem to want to spend time with me. He just blows things off when I try to talk with him about things that worry me. What should I do? And any member of the panel.
Who wants to answer?
Well, I would say try to meet them where they are. What are their activities and interests? Often one of the ways that I try to relate to my teenage clients is to talk to them about things that they're interested in. So I know a lot more about video games that I've never played, actually, just because that's kind of a common ground to engage them. Some of what you're talking about is developmentally appropriate. They don't want to talk to parents, and so some of my other panel members have said it is important also that they have trusted adults that when they don't feel like talking to a parent, but just really try to meet them where they are and try to engage in things that are of interest to them and learn about things that are of interest to them. Because if you can talk to them on that level, that really demonstrates my parent actually does care. They really want to know what is important to me.
Being the father of some grown children, I can tell you the older they got, the less time they wanted to spend with me. I don't understand what that would be about, but that tends to be the growing process. Our relationships turn into adult relationships instead of parent-child type relationships. And that is the way things go. We raise them up so they can go out on their own to flourish. So, Steve, I think this one's probably geared towards you. Are bullying issues civil rights issues?
Sometimes they can be. If it infringes on somebody's stated civil rights, it could be you could be breaking the law, federal law. Also, if your child has a 504 IEP related to a disability, it certainly can be a civil rights issue as well, Title IX violation. I would really encourage you to speak with your principal at your school or your counselor to get more information about that, but absolutely bullying issues can be civil rights issues.
Okay. Do violent video games and movies contribute to youth violence or mental issues?
Okay, I'm going to take that one because I have a big opinion about it. Okay.
I think we're all chomping at the bit for that one.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to make this distinction. First, I want to say a lot of it depends on the kid. If you are talking about a child who has come from a background with very poor boundaries, maybe they've witnessed domestic violence in their home, or they have seen bullying or other behaviors of like degrading other people, that kind of thing. Sometimes those kids that don't have a strong, supportive family unit, their ability to distinguish between what is reality and what is fiction is way different than a kid who has grown up in a loving, supportive family where people have good boundaries and treat each other with respect and kindness and all the things that go along with that. Current research doesn't show like a one-to-one correlation that if your kid plays violent video games, they're going to be violent. It just doesn't show a one-to-one correlation there. However, I think as parents, it behooves us to limit the time to think about, is this age appropriate for this child? Do they understand that this is totally fictional? I really think that is something that parents have to monitor. But I'm going to say there's not like a one-to-one correlation. If my child plays violent video games, they're going to be violent. Research doesn't show that.
And I would say if your child has acted out in violent ways toward others or towards animals as well, that it could, increase the likelihood of more acts of violence after viewing a violent video game or being fascinated with violence in media.
I would also like to add a little bit to that, Karen, what you were saying about the limiting time. Some of the video games, they're playing like 10, 12 hours a day. And I don't care what it is, if you're doing it 10 or 12 hours a day or more every day, it's going to change a little bit of your mindset. I mean, I don't know if anybody has had other things that they've done, like in big spurts like that. It's going to change your perspective. Your whole time is spent focused on shooting and killing, so that can make a difference too. So it is really important to think about who the kid is, what things are they going through, but pay attention to the dosage. It's probably not healthy for anyone to do it for those extended periods of time. That's just not a healthy activity to do for that much time. So.
Great. How do you help a friend who doesn't want help but really needs it?
That's a great question. I think we actually encounter a lot of kids that come into counseling that need help, and are a little bit resistant at first. And I think there's a lot of reasons why someone might be resistant. They might not feel like anything can help. They might be kind of hopeless. So, it might be encouraging that person, letting them know that that there is other options, that there are people that care about them, and that you're really worried about them. So some of those things might be helpful. It might be that maybe they've tried to get help before and it hasn't worked. So again, kind of that encouraging. They may be kind of scared to put the hope into, that this could make a difference, because what if it doesn't? So I think just being a friend, being there for them, letting them know you're having a really hard time and it's okay to get help, and just really encourage them to do that. And hopefully they'll start to change their mindset a little bit towards that. And I think when you may talk about suicidal stuff as well, because I think that's a little different.
I think taking the time to listen to them and have conversation without judgment and showing care is always important. But also, when you're having a conversation and it gets to the point where you think they're at high risk, you want to ask them who they trust, that we can go to this trusted adult together. So when you're concerned about someone, you let them choose the person that they're going to reach out to, and you partner with them so that they feel supported. So you give them that opportunity. Okay, who do you trust? And I'm going to go with you, and when are we going to do it? And I'll be there for you the whole time. And then, of course, if they're at imminent risk for something, we don't keep secrets about anything that's a risk to our well-being or someone else's well-being. So there is a point where, as a friend, you go to your trusted adult. If they're saying, no, this is a secret, this has to be between us, we don't keep secrets about that. So then you get to choose who you think the best person would be to go and get some help or have a conversation about how to help them.
I think, too, just being near is helpful. Your presence is helpful. Being there to talk to if they need to is helpful. I mean, just think about, as an adult, how many times we've just needed somebody to be close but not even talk about what's happening. But when it does raise to crisis, that you have the tools to utilize in those situations.
Okay, we've got some very similar type questions and statements within this, and a lot of what is being said here is definitely, if you have a friend, tell somebody. They need to tell somebody. There's lots of resources. We have resources right here on the stage. They've got tables in the back that you will have an opportunity to go back there and be able to get phone numbers and ways to contact them for these resources, so they can get whatever help may be needed. And it'll be just important. It's always that thing that we say, if you see something, say something, and that's in all arenas. If you see it, say something to somebody that you trust. There's somebody out there that you can reach out to. It may be, if you know a professional, but there's a teacher, there's an administrator, there's a custodian, there is a child nutritionist, there's a nurse, there's security, there is somebody there. There's another student that you can talk to on a regular basis that they might have somebody they can talk to. It's important that you actually say something to somebody.
I also want to add really quick that the COPES hotline is a really good resource too for situations where you're not sure what to do, but you know someone needs help. Like I said, it's free, it's 24/7, and it can be anonymous. Kids can call, parents can call, and you can say, I don't really feel like I can share this information, but I'm in this situation and I need help knowing what to do next. So if you get to the point where you're not sure what to do, you don't know who to call, you don't have anyone you can talk to, it's 918-744-4800.
And these are out in the lobby, the
Yeah,
brochures
we do
for
have
COPES.
the information in the lobby.
Here's somewhat of a statement and seeking some affirmation. Depression is hidden and can be hard to seek out. It's masked with happiness, and some of the happiest people are actually the saddest. Am I right?
You know, I think a lot of people have this common misconception, and she spoke to this earlier, that depression just looks like sadness. Frequently when I work with teenagers and especially teenage boys, it often looks more like anger or risky behaviors. And sad thing to understand is that sometimes when people have reached the point where they've made the decision that they want to end their life, they can actually appear to be more peaceful and happy because they've made a decision about what they think they need to do. That's a little bit scary. But you cannot tell by looking at someone that they're depressed. Oh, you can't. I mean, sometimes you can see it in their face, or if they've stopped taking care of themselves, those are obvious things. But there are many times when you cannot just walk up to a person and go, wow, they're really struggling. So that's why I think it's so important to have that communication, to let people know, I'm here if you need me, I'm here to support you. At my school, a lot of the referrals that we get, or the way that we come into knowledge that a kid is having a hard time, is because their friend will say, hey, they'll go to the school counselor or a teacher and say, hey, my buddy put this on social media last night. My friend put this picture on Instagram, or my friend said, texted this to people. And so children and adolescents being willing to reach out to help for their friends, reach out to a trusted adult, that's a lot of the times, that's the way that we find out that kids really are struggling.
I have a few more, but time doesn't allow for a lot of it. But everybody here will be out at their tables, that if you want to ask specifically, because it may be to one of them specifically, you're more than welcome to do that. But I will just do this one last one. We'll end with it. Do you have any tips on helping out a person who is quiet all the time and seems to be keeping all their emotions in?
I think a good place to start is just kind of taking the time to have a moment with them. If you have concerns, letting them know what your concerns are and listen to them. And maybe the first time you do it, they don't totally open up, but consistently being there for them, checking in, even the smallest little check-ins, a text or a, hey, how you doing? Any of those little things can lay the groundwork for feeling like they can trust you, maybe to have longer or more serious conversations. So just being consistent and showing that you're there for someone and that you care is gonna, I think, build some of those bridges if you're concerned and they're quiet.
I think as families, too, we have to start having those conversations about emotions. What are you experiencing? What are you going through? What is it leading you toward? And I don't know if we're doing that enough in these moments. I mean, sometimes our kids, when they hear us talk about emotions, it's during a stress time, when there's a problem, when there's a financial problem, when there's a relational problem, when there's a problem at school. So those are the times when emotion talk rises to the surface. But having a vocabulary of emotion, as a family norm will help, your kids develop that dialogue with you as a parent.
I think as a parent, one of the best things you can do for your kids is for you to develop your emotional vocabulary and understanding, because a lot of us might have been raised in families where, the way that we handled problems is we just didn't talk about them until they were at a crisis and something had to be done, or maybe, we do this thing, I call it emotional sanitization, where, okay, everybody's getting a little too upset, we can't talk about this anymore. So that those skills of learning emotional regulation, if you didn't learn that, and if you didn't have that in your family, then it's really hard for you to be able to have that with your kids. So as a parent, if you see that that's something that's a struggle for you, then the best thing you can do for your child is for you to do some work on yourself too. See there, I gave you homework.
I have a tool for that too. Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence has an app. It's called a mood meter. And it's like $1. I didn't think I was going to plug them, but I'm going to. It's $1. And it has 4 quadrants, a red, yellow, blue, and green. And you can actually choose what emotion you're feeling for the day. For instance, restful, satisfied, blessed would be in the green section. In the red section, frightened, fuming, furious, frustrated. In the blue section, miserable, alienated, despondent. In the yellow section, enthusiastic, optimistic, etc. But you can plot how you feel in a moment, and it actually records your feeling. And you can choose to stay there, or you can choose to shift. And it will give you some inspirational thoughts if you want to shift into a different emotion for the moment and in the future. But I use this all the time, and it actually plots you a graph as well. That way you can actually see how your emotions have kind of ebbed and flowed over a period of time. So it's called Mood Meter. It's an app. It's by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and I really like it as a tool for an emotional vocabulary.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out to this, and we really want to thank our panel for being here and giving us the advice that they have given. We appreciate their work. Again, they will have tables out there. Feel free to go up and get the information from there. And also, the little index cards, they've got those in the back. If you would give us some review on this event, we've done something similar to this last spring. It was more of a breakout session as opposed to a panel session. And we went with a panel session this time, but the Safety and Healthy Student Committee has been putting these things together, and we're looking at one for the spring. So look for information coming out. We're doing as much as we can to give you the different resources as parents to deal with your child, because they didn't come with a manual. So we're going to try the best that we can to help you out with finding the different resources. Thank you.